The first thing anyone saw was a man in gym shorts flying through the air like a potato launched from a cannon. He flailed once, yelled something that sounded like a half-hearted battle cry, then smacked into the arena floor face first. The crowd of thousands roared with laughter, the sound echoing through the colossal stadium that hovered somewhere above Jupiter's red storms. Cameras zoomed in on his crumpled form as alien commentators chattered in 17 different languages, their captions labeling Earth's champion as the most disappointing specimen the galaxy had ever produced. This was Jim Henderson's debut, and at that exact moment, most of the galaxy assumed it would also be his farewell. Jim groaned, rolled over, and propped himself on one elbow, blinking at the massive holographic scoreboard floating above. The words Earth Warrior lit up in neon green next to his name, which looked ridiculous beside titles like the Acid Demon of Rockland 9 and the Bone Crusher of Zerthak Prime. He spat out something that might have been a tooth or maybe just a peanut from the snack he had been eating before the match. Either way, he wiped his mouth, stood up slowly, and waved as though he had meant to fall the entire time. The laughter in the arena only grew louder. From the royal box, the alien warlords leaned forward in disbelief. These were beings who had conquered entire planets, who devoured suns for breakfast, who shredded armies without breaking a sweat. And Earth had sent this? A man in a faded tracksuit jacket and squeaky sneakers? His hair was messy, his expression confused but somehow confident, and he carried the air of someone who had accidentally walked into the wrong party but decided to stay for the free food. The warlords laughed so hard one of them nearly fell out of his jeweled hover throne. Jim looked up at them, shading his eyes from the blinding arena lights. "Do you guys validate parking?" he shouted. A hush fell for half a second, then the entire stadium erupted again, this time in howls of amusement mixed with outrage. The alien commentators replayed the moment from every angle, adding dramatic slow-motion zooms as though he had just delivered the punchline of the century. Behind Jim, the massive screen replayed his introduction ceremony from minutes earlier, when the galaxy first met Earth's so-called Wildest warrior. There had been lasers, fireworks, even a drumline of robotic centipedes beating out an ominous rhythm. Then Jim had stepped out eating a hot dog, waved like a man late to his kid's soccer game, and tripped over the ceremonial carpet. The crowd had not stopped laughing since. What no one knew, what no one even suspected, was that Jim Henderson had not come here to win glory or honor. He had come because someone had mailed him a letter with a free trip voucher and a promise of light exercise. He thought it was a fitness retreat in Florida. Now he was standing in front of several million screaming extraterrestrials who expected him to fight creatures with tusks bigger than his entire body. To be fair, Jim himself was still processing the situation. An announcer with 6 heads and a voice like thunder bellowed his name again, dragging the moment out for maximum humiliation. "Earth's wildest warrior," the voice boomed. "Jim Henderson!" The camera zoomed in on his sneakers, which squeaked loudly with every step he took toward the center of the arena. One alien commentator was openly crying from laughing so hard. Another declared this the greatest comedy act in tournament history before the first match had even started. Up in the stands, ordinary spectators munched on glow-in-the-dark snacks while placing bets on how many seconds Jim would last. The current favorite was 13. Some bet he would surrender instantly. A few optimistic gamblers bet he would accidentally defeat himself before the enemy even arrived. Not a single person placed a bet on him actually winning anything. The first challenger entered the arena with a roar that shook the floor. It was a beast genetically engineered for combat, a cross between a rhinoceros, a scorpion, and every nightmare anyone had ever had after eating bad seafood. Its claws dripped venom. Its eyes glowed red. It wore armor made from the bones of previous opponents. The crowd chanted its name like a hymn. It stomped toward Jim, each step cracking the tiles beneath its feet. Jim stared at it, then looked down at the whistle around his neck. It was the same whistle he had used for 20 years as a middle school gym teacher back in Ohio. He blew on it once, producing a shrill tweet that echoed across the arena. The beast froze mid-step, tilting its head in confusion. Jim pointed to the ground like he was scolding a misbehaving puppy. "Sit," he said firmly. To everyone's shock, the beast sat. The crowd went silent for the first time all night. Even the alien warlord stopped laughing. Jim walked casually around the creature, inspecting its claws like he was grading a science project. He patted its armored shoulder, then looked up at the announcer. "Does this mean I win?" he asked. The announcer stammered in 17 languages before settling on one word. "Continue." The beast, apparently confused by the lack of violence, stayed seated as Jim climbed onto its back like a man mounting a stubborn mule. He produced a half-eaten granola bar from his pocket and held it out. The beast sniffed it cautiously. Then, to the astonishment of billions watching across the galaxy, the monster delicately accepted the snack and began chewing like a content cow. Jim grinned. "Good boy," he said. Then, as the crowd slowly realized what was happening, he raised his arms in triumph. The entire arena erupted, half in disbelief, half in outrage, as the scoreboard flashed winner, Earth's wildest warrior. Up in the royal box, the alien warlords stared in stunned silence. One finally spoke, his voice trembling with confusion. "What just happened?" he demanded. Jim looked up at them, still sitting casually on the tamed beast like it was a park bench. "Guess you guys aren't dog people," he said with a shrug. The crowd howled with laughter again, but this time the tone had changed. It was not just mockery anymore. There was something else mixed in now, something unexpected. The arena lights dimmed after Jim's unexpected victory, leaving the alien warlords whispering among themselves in disbelief. Across the galaxy, commentators replayed the scene endlessly, analyzing every second of how a man in squeaky sneakers had turned a genetically engineered death machine into something that looked like a pet at a family barbecue. The laughter that had once been aimed at Jim now carried a nervous edge, like maybe this wasn't just a ridiculous accident. Maybe Earth's wildest warrior wasn't as hopeless as he seemed. The problem was, Jim wasn't entirely sure either. He had gone from eating a hot dog in the stands to winning a gladiator fight by giving a monster a granola bar, and now everyone expected him to keep doing things he didn't know how to do. Back in the preparation area, a place filled with weapon racks, energy shields, and alien soldiers pumping themselves up with battle roars, Jim sat on a bench drinking from a water bottle. He wasn't training, stretching, or sharpening any weapons. He was reading the tournament pamphlet they had given him when he arrived, mostly because it had a map on the back showing where the bathrooms were. Around him, other competitors eyed him with a mixture of irritation and confusion. They had trained their whole lives for this tournament. Some had survived battles that destroyed civilizations. Yet here was a man who looked like he still drove his kids to school every morning, and he had made it to round 2 without a single punch thrown. An alien coach with 6 arms stomped over and threw down a pile of armor pieces at Jim's feet. The armor looked like it had been designed for a creature twice his size with twice the number of limbs. Jim stared at it, then at the coach, then back at the armor. "Yeah," he said finally. "I don't think they make this in medium." The coach snarled something in a language Jim didn't understand and stormed off, leaving Jim to poke at the armor pieces like a man checking vegetables at the grocery store. He decided against wearing them. They were heavy, uncomfortable, and besides, he figured the best defense was simply not getting hit in the first place. The lights flickered again, signaling the start of the second trial. The announcer's voice boomed across the stadium, introducing it as the trial of Beast's successor, the trial of endurance. The words echoed ominously, promising something far worse than last time. Spectators cheered wildly as the floor of the arena shifted, tiles sliding apart to reveal a massive labyrinth rising from below. Walls 20 feet high formed a twisting maze across the battleground. Somewhere inside it, mechanical growls and inhuman screeches echoed, promising danger behind every corner. Jim squinted at the labyrinth as he stepped into the arena. "Oh good," he muttered. "A giant death maze. Because the day wasn't weird enough already." He glanced back at the beast from round 1, now lounging in a holding pen nearby. It had refused to leave after the match, following Jim around like a loyal puppy. He had named it Kevin. Kevin watched him with glowing red eyes that somehow seemed almost affectionate. Jim gave it a thumbs up before turning toward the maze and stepping inside. The walls closed behind him with a heavy clang, leaving the crowd to watch from above through hovering drones. Alien commentators chattered excitedly, describing every twist and turn as Jim wandered deeper into the labyrinth. Traps triggered around him constantly. Spiked floors slammed upward without warning. Walls shifted to block his path. At one point, a pit of lava opened under his feet, forcing him to leap to safety in a move that looked far more graceful than he felt. He wasn't running through the maze like a trained soldier. He wasn't even walking cautiously like someone aware of the danger. Jim moved through it like a man looking for the exit at a shopping mall he didn't want to be in. Somehow, that confused the traps as much as it confused the audience. Halfway through the maze, the mechanical growls grew louder. Jim turned a corner and came face to face with a creature twice the size of the last one. Its metal exoskeleton glinted under the lights. Its tail dripped acid onto the floor, hissing as it burned holes straight through the tiles. It let out a roar that shook dust from the walls. Jim stood there holding his empty water bottle like it was going to help. Then, very slowly, he reached into his pocket and pulled out another granola bar. The crowd watching on the screens erupted in laughter as Jim waved the granola bar at the creature like a matador with a cape. The beast lunged, jaws snapping inches from his head. Jim ducked behind a wall as the creature slammed into it, momentarily dazed. He didn't fight it directly. Instead, he ran deeper into the maze, leading it through trap after trap. Spiked ceilings crashed down on its tail. Flamethrowers hidden in the walls roasted its legs. A collapsing bridge sent it tumbling into a pit before it clawed its way out again, angrier than ever. By the time Jim reached the center of the maze, the creature was limping, smoking, and thoroughly humiliated. From above, it looked like strategy. To Jim, it felt like panic combined with cardio he hadn't done since high school gym class. He collapsed at the finish line as the announcer declared him the winner again, his voice cracking like he couldn't believe the words coming out of his own mouth. Jim lay on his back, chest heaving, while the audience exploded into cheers. Some of them were still laughing, but now it carried the same edge as before, that hint of uncertainty about whether this ridiculous man might actually be dangerous in his own way. Up in the royal box, the alien warlords argued furiously. This was not how the tournament was supposed to go. Earth's warrior was meant to be a joke, a warm-up act before the real bloodshed. Yet here he was, winning fights without ever really fighting, turning the whole event into something between a comedy routine and a strategic disaster. One warlord slammed his fist on the railing, demanding that the next challenge be impossible for the human to survive. Another warned that making the games look rigged could spark unrest among the spectators watching from every corner of the galaxy. Jim finally sat up, wiping sweat from his face. The crowd chanted his name now, thousands of voices shouting Earth Warrior like it was suddenly the most exciting thing in the universe. He gave a tired wave before stumbling back toward the preparation area, where Kevin the Beast was waiting. The creature nuzzled his shoulder like a horse greeting its rider. Jim patted its armored head. "Yeah," he muttered. "I'm starting to think they might actually be in trouble." The alien warlords gathered in the royal box after Jim's second victory, their jeweled armor glittering under the arena lights as they argued in low, furious tones. This human was supposed to be a joke, a sideshow before the real warriors faced off, but now he had survived 2 rounds and the crowd was starting to love him. Billions of spectators across the galaxy were tuning in not to see blood and glory but to watch Earth's wildest warrior trip over his own shoelaces and somehow win anyway. The warlords hated it. They hated the way the audience laughed, the way their control over the tournament was slipping, the way Jim seemed immune to fear. Some suspected trickery, others demanded he be crushed in the next round, but one among them, Commander Arath, stayed silent, watching Jim closely with his narrow, calculating eyes. Down in the preparation area, Jim sat cross-legged on the floor eating a sandwich, while everyone else sharpened weapons or chanted battle hymns. His armor, still unworn, lay in a dusty pile nearby. The other competitors avoided him now. It was one thing to mock the human when everyone expected him to die in the first minute, But now he had beaten a death beast and a maze full of traps without breaking much of a sweat. Well, that wasn't entirely true. He was sweating plenty, but mostly from running, not from fear. The more victories he earned, the stranger the atmosphere became. The warriors had come for a tournament of skill and savagery. Instead, they were getting a man who fought like a substitute teacher armed with granola bars and sarcasm. The announcer's voice boomed again, calling the audience to attention as the next challenge prepared to begin. The trial of intellect, it declared, would test the mental limits of the remaining contestants. There was a long pause, as if the entire stadium needed a moment to picture Jim Henderson in any kind of intellectual contest. He wiped his hands on his shorts, looked up at the hovering cameras, and gave a little wave like someone greeting relatives on a holiday video call. The crowd laughed. The warlord scowled. The arena floor changed again, tiles spinning and folding until a massive sphere rose from the center. It glowed with alien symbols and mechanical locks, each layer rotating independently in impossible patterns. The goal, according to the announcer, was to open the puzzle sphere before time ran out. Failure would trigger a mechanism described only as unpleasant for the contestant involved. Warriors with cybernetic brains and centuries of tactical experience had taken hours to solve similar puzzles in past tournaments. Jim stared at it like it was a vending machine that had eaten his dollar. He walked up to the sphere, scratched his head, and poked it once. Lights blinked in complex sequences across its surface. He circled it slowly, mumbling to himself, pushing random panels to see what happened. The audience leaned forward, expecting him to fail instantly. The warlord smiled cold, anticipatory smiles. Even Commander Arath crossed his arms, waiting to see whether his suspicion about this human's luck was about to collapse in front of everyone. Then, as Jim circled the sphere for the third time, he stumbled on a loose tile in the floor. He grabbed the puzzle to steady himself. There was a loud click. Lights flashed. Entire layers of the sphere rotated, locks disengaging in rapid succession. A moment later the puzzle opened with a soft chime, revealing a glowing crystal core inside. Jim blinked at it, still holding his sandwich in one hand. "Huh," he said. "That was easier than it looked." He picked up the crystal and turned to the announcer. "Do I keep this or—" The stadium erupted. Some spectators laughed until they couldn't breathe. Others booed, furious that what was supposed to be a deadly challenge had turned into slapstick theater again. The warlords shouted over each other in rage, demanding to know whether the puzzle had been tampered with. The judges ran diagnostics twice before confirming the human had somehow solved it without triggering any traps. Jim didn't mention the part where he had just tripped into the solution because he figured that detail wasn't going to make anyone less angry. Commander Arath found him afterward in the preparation area, away from the cameras. Arath was taller than Jim by several feet, his dark armor engraved with symbols of victories across half the galaxy. He studied Jim for a long moment before speaking. "You do not fight like the others," he said finally, his voice low and metallic. "You do not think like them either. And yet you win." Jim shrugged, finishing the last bite of his sandwich. "I'm just trying not to die, man." Arath glanced around to make sure no one else was listening. "The next trial will be different. They will not let the crowd laugh much longer. They plan to kill you in the arena." Jim raised his eyebrows. "Yeah, I kind of figured the whole death maze wasn't exactly a friendly obstacle course." "This is not a game," Arath said sharply. "The warlords see you as a threat now. If you keep winning, you humiliate them before the entire galaxy. They will not forgive that." He hesitated, as if weighing whether to continue. "You should forfeit. Leave while you can." Jim looked at him for a long moment, then shook his head. "I don't like bullies," he said simply. "And these guys seem like the biggest bullies in the universe." Arath stared at him with an expression Jim couldn't read. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away, his cape sweeping the floor behind him. Back in the royal box, the warlords argued about how to handle the human problem. Some demanded a challenge so lethal no amount of luck or clumsiness could save him. Others worried the audience would revolt if the games started looking unfair. Billions watched these tournaments every year. The Empire's power depended on keeping them entertained, on pretending the games were glorious battles of skill rather than carefully controlled spectacles. If the crowd thought the outcome was rigged, riots could break out across entire star systems. Meanwhile, Jim sat with Kevin the Beast, scratching behind its armored ears while it made a sound suspiciously like a purr. He thought about Arath's warning. Maybe the alien was right. Maybe he should quit before things got ugly. But something about the way the warlords sneered from their royal box made his blood boil. He had seen the same look on playground bullies back home, the kind who pushed kids around until someone finally stood up to them. Jim had never been able to ignore that look. He wasn't about to start now. As the lights dimmed for the closing ceremony of the day's matches, the announcer declared the next trial would be the most dangerous yet. The crowd roared its approval. Jim leaned back against Kevin's warm, scaly side, feeling the creature's slow, steady breathing. The warlords wanted him scared. They wanted him broken before the next round began. Instead, he felt something else stirring in his chest, something he hadn't felt since the start of this insane tournament. He was starting to believe he could win. The next day the stadium felt different. The air crackled with tension as though the entire galaxy had taken a collective breath and was waiting to see if Earth's wildest warrior would finally fall. Billions of viewers tuned in, not just for the spectacle but because now the games had become something bigger. It was no longer about the tournament itself. It was about the human who had made the warlords look like fools 3 times in a row. The audience smelled rebellion in the air, though no one said it out loud. The Empire thrived on control, on carefully orchestrated outcomes wrapped in the illusion of fairness. And here came Jim Henderson with his granola bars, accidental victories, and complete disregard for how things were supposed to work. He was a crack in the system, and everyone could feel it spreading. Jim walked into the preparation area with Kevin trotting behind him like an oversized scaly dog. The creature had refused to leave his side since the first round and had become an unofficial mascot of the games, earning cheers almost as loud as Jim himself. Today the other warriors gave him even more space than usual. Some looked at him with open suspicion, convinced he was cheating somehow. Others nodded at him respectfully, as though he had crossed some invisible line into being a real contender. Jim himself felt mostly tired. His legs ached from running through the maze, his arms hurt from climbing out of pits, and he was beginning to miss his quiet life back in Ohio. But there was no going back now. Not with the crowd chanting his name every time he appeared on screen. Not with the warlords glaring down at him like he had personally insulted each of their mothers. The announcer's voice thundered over the stadium, introducing the trial of champions. The name alone promised something awful. As the arena floor shifted again, massive gates opened around the perimeter. One by one, 10 warriors stepped out, each more terrifying than the last. They carried weapons that glowed with deadly energy, armor carved with the marks of battles won across star systems. Some were twice Jim's size, all muscle and claws and cybernetics. The crowd roared at the sight of them, a sea of noise that rattled the very walls of the arena. The warlords leaned forward in their thrones, hungry for the moment this ridiculous human finally met his end. Jim stared at the 10 warriors as they formed a semicircle around him. He bent down, tightened the laces on his sneakers, and muttered, "Well, this should be fun." He had no plan, no strategy, nothing but the faint hope that maybe they would trip over each other if he stayed out of the way long enough. The announcer gave the signal to begin, and the trial of champions exploded into chaos. The warriors charged at once, a wall of blades and claws and energy blasts. Jim dove to the side, barely avoiding a hammer the size of a refrigerator that smashed into the ground where he had been standing. 2 warriors collided as they swung at him from opposite directions, knocking each other off balance. Jim scrambled away while they started arguing in a language full of snarls and clicks. Another warrior lunged at him, only to trip over the tail of the one beside him. The crowd gasped as the fight turned into a mess of flailing limbs and clashing weapons, none of which seemed to be hitting Jim. He stayed alive by sheer accident at first, ducking and dodging while the warriors got in each other's way. But as the fight wore on, he started to notice patterns. They were all trying to prove themselves to the crowd, each one desperate to land the killing blow. They kept getting in each other's paths, stealing shots, turning on one another when attacks went wrong. Jim realized he did not have to fight them directly. All he had to do was keep moving, keep dodging, keep taunting them until their pride did the work for him. So he started talking. "Wow, you almost hit me that time," he called as a spear missed his head by inches. "Hey, nice swing. Too bad it hit your friend instead." The warriors roared in frustration, their attacks growing wilder as the audience laughed harder with every missed strike. The more they tried to kill him, the more they got in each other's way. One by one, they fell to traps in the arena or to each other's weapons until only two remained, circling him with murder in their eyes. Jim backed up slowly, heart pounding. The last two warriors looked at each other, then at him, then charged from opposite sides. At the very last second, Jim dropped flat on the ground. The two warriors collided headfirst with a sound like a thunderclap and collapsed in a heap. The crowd went insane. The scoreboard lit up declaring Earth's wildest warrior the winner again. Jim lay on the floor staring at the sky, wondering how on earth he was still alive. Up in the royal box, the warlords were no longer arguing. They were furious. This human had humiliated their best fighters in front of the entire galaxy. Some shouted to end the tournament immediately. Others demanded the next trial be rigged so thoroughly there was no chance of survival. Commander Arath said nothing. He watched the chaos below with unreadable eyes before finally turning and leaving the box without a word. Later, as the arena cleared and workers repaired the damage from the fight, Arath found Jim in the preparation area. The alien's dark armor gleamed under the lights as he stepped close enough that no one else could hear. "You are in danger," he said simply. Jim snorted. "Yeah, I kinda figured. 10 against 1 was a big clue." Arath shook his head. "You don't understand. The warlords plan to kill you whether you win or lose the next trial. They cannot let you leave this arena alive after what you've done to their pride." Jim frowned, wiping sweat from his forehead. "So what? I throw the fight. Let them win. If you lose, they will make sure you die. If you win, they will make sure you die. Either way, Earth will suffer when they use this as an excuse for war. You have embarrassed them before the entire galaxy. They will take revenge." Jim stared at him, the noise of the celebrating crowd echoing faintly in the distance. For the first time since the tournament began, the weight of what he was caught and started to sink in. This was bigger than him now. Bigger than the games, bigger than the warlord's pride. He thought about Earth, about the people watching this broadcast back home thinking it was all some kind of wild adventure. They had no idea what kind of danger was coming. He looked at Arath. "Then I guess the next round isn't just about me anymore." Arath's eyes gleamed. "No," he said. "It is about the Empire itself." The day of the final trial arrived with the sky full of storm clouds swirling over the arena as though the weather itself knew something monumental was about to happen. Billions of viewers across the galaxy tuned in. Entire cities had stopped to watch. Even on Earth, people filled stadiums and bars to see whether Jim Henderson, the man who had somehow survived every impossible challenge, would win one more time or finally meet the fate everyone had expected since the start. The announcer's voice boomed louder than ever as the arena floor shifted again, rising into towering platforms and jagged spikes. At the center stood the reigning champion of the tournament, a six-armed warlord named Kravax the Unbroken, whose armor was forged from the ruins of conquered worlds and whose weapons glowed with the energy of dying stars. He had never been defeated. He had killed opponents larger, stronger, and faster than anything Jim could imagine. The crowd fell into an expectant hush as the two figures faced each other, one a legend of destruction, the other a man in sneakers who still had peanut butter on his shirt from breakfast. Jim stood with his hands on his hips, staring at Kravax like a man realizing too late he had signed up for the wrong summer camp. Kevin the Beast waited nervously at the edge of the arena, unwilling to leave Jim's side even though the handlers had tried to drag him back. Somewhere high above in the royal box, the warlords watched in silence, their eyes gleaming with malice. This was no longer a contest for them. This was an execution stage for entertainment. The traps hidden in the arena floor were set to trigger against Jim alone. The air vents would flood with poison gas if he gained the upper hand. Kravax himself had been promised anything he desired if he made the death suitably slow and humiliating. It was a performance, one designed to end with Jim's body on the ground and the Empire's pride restored before the eyes of the galaxy. The signal to begin thundered across the arena. Kravax charged immediately, his 6 arms swinging weapons that cut the air with sizzling energy trails. Jim dove aside as the ground where he had been standing erupted into shards of molten rock. The crowd roared as the chase began, Kravax moving like a storm-given flesh, Jim scrambling across platforms that collapsed under his feet or exploded when he stepped too close. The traps activated exactly as planned, forcing him toward the champion's waiting blades again and again. He dodged and stumbled and slid across crumbling ledges, staying alive more by instinct than skill. But then something unexpected happened. One of the traps malfunctioned. A collapsing tower meant for Jim fell toward Kravax instead. The champion leaped away with a snarl as the warlords in the royal box shouted in confusion. Another trap triggered too early, blocking Kravax's path instead of Jim's. Someone was tampering with the arena systems. Cameras caught a brief glimpse of Arath moving through the control rooms under the stands, his cape snapping behind him as he cut wires and smashed consoles. The audience erupted when they realized what was happening. The games were supposed to be fair, or at least look fair, and now the Empire's corruption was on display for everyone to see. Jim noticed too. He ducked another swing from Kravax and shouted, "Hey, thanks, mystery saboteur!" before rolling behind a half-collapsed wall. Kravax roared in fury, his attacks growing wilder as the arena itself turned against him. Platforms shifted unexpectedly under his feet. Energy barriers meant to trap Jim instead trapped the champion for precious seconds, long enough for Jim to scramble out of reach. The audience, smelling scandal and rebellion, began cheering for Jim louder than ever. Billions of voices across the galaxy chanted his name until the very walls shook. Kravax finally broke free of the barriers and charged again, this time moving even faster, his eyes burning with rage. Jim ducked and weaved, staying just ahead of him, until they reached the center platform where the ground split apart to reveal a pit of seething energy below. One wrong step and either of them would be vaporized instantly. The crowd held its breath as Kravax swung all 6 weapons at once in a blur of deadly light. Jim had nowhere left to run. At the last possible second, a shadow leapt into the arena. Kevin the Beast, breaking free of its handlers, crashed into Kravax with a roar that shook the sky. The champion stumbled, weapons clanging against the creature's armored hide as Jim threw himself clear. The crowd went insane, chanting both Jim's and Kevin's names now as the beast tore into the champion with claws and teeth. Kravax fought back fiercely, slashing deep wounds across Kevin's sides, but the creature held him long enough for Jim to spot something glinting on the platform's edge, one of the arena's control panels, exposed by the collapsing floor. Jim sprinted toward it, skidding across the broken tiles, and slammed his hand down on the biggest lever he could find. All at once the traps across the arena reversed. Energy barriers snapped up around the royal box instead of the platform. Poison gas flooded the warlords' private chambers, forcing them to smash windows and crawl onto the ledges above the screaming crowd. The Empire's leaders, untouchable for centuries, were suddenly exposed and gasping before the entire galaxy. Kravax roared and threw Kevin aside with a final heave, turning back toward Jim with murder in his eyes. But the moment had shifted. The audience was no longer chanting for blood. They were chanting for the Empire to fall. They had seen the rigged traps, the sabotage, the panic in the royal box. Whole star systems watching from afar were already rioting. The illusion of honor and glory was shattered beyond repair. Jim faced Kravax one last time as the champion charged across the crumbling platform. This time Jim did not run. He stood near the pit's edge, waiting until the last possible second before stepping aside. The platform buckled under Kravax's weight. Tiles split and collapsed. With a final bellow of rage, the undefeated champion of the galaxy tumbled into the seething energy below, vanishing in a burst of light. Silence fell for one heartbeat. Then the entire arena erupted in chaos. Spectators cheered and screamed. The warlords shouted orders no one obeyed. Erath appeared on the central platform, his armor scorched from the control room battles, and raised his weapon toward the royal box as soldiers across the arena turned on their commanders. Jim stood there swaying on his feet, too tired to even celebrate, as the empire that had ruled for centuries began to collapse around him live on every screen in the galaxy. Smoke drifted through the shattered arena as the crowd surged onto the floor, a tidal wave of voices rising from every corner of the stadium. The warlords had vanished from the royal box, fleeing through secret tunnels as soldiers loyal to the rebellion stormed the platforms. The Empire's banners burned above the stands while cameras broadcast the chaos to billions of viewers across the galaxy. For the first time in living memory, the games had ended not with the triumph of the Empire but with its humiliation. And standing in the middle of it all, surrounded by crumbling walls and overturned weapons, was Jim Henderson, Earth's wildest warrior, looking like a man who had accidentally set fire to a neighbor's shed and was waiting for someone else to explain it to the fire department. Kevin limped toward him through the smoke, battered and bleeding but still on his feet. The creature pressed its massive head against Jim's shoulder with a low rumble, a sound that might have been a purr or might have been pain. Jim scratched behind its jagged ears and muttered, "Yeah, buddy, I think we're both gonna need a long nap after this." He turned slowly, taking in the chaos around him. The audience was no longer an audience. They were rebels now, soldiers of convenience tearing down statues of the warlords, ripping apart the thrones where their rulers had sat for centuries. The tournament had been the Empire's greatest symbol of control, a spectacle designed to remind everyone who held power. And now, because of one retired gym teacher who hadn't even known what planet he was flying to, the whole system was collapsing in real time. Erath strode across the floor toward Jim, his dark armor scorched and dented, his weapon still humming with energy. He looked at Jim the way one might look at a storm that had appeared out of nowhere and destroyed an entire fleet by accident. "It is done," Erath said, his voice echoing above the noise. "The warlords have fallen. The people will rise now. The Empire will not survive this day." Jim rubbed the back of his neck, still breathing hard from the fight. "Yeah, great," he said. So, does this mean I can go home now?" Erath stared at him like he was insane. "You are a hero across the galaxy. You have toppled a regime that ruled for centuries. They will sing songs of this day for generations. And you want to go home? Look, man," Jim said, spreading his arms. "I didn't plan any of this. I got a letter in the mail saying free vacation, minimal exercise required. Next thing I know, I'm fighting a six-armed guy with glowing swords while an alien dog helps me overthrow a government. I'm not a hero. I'm a guy who teaches dodgeball." Erath considered this for a long moment, then nodded slowly as though accepting that some things in the universe simply could not be explained. Around them, rebel leaders were already shouting orders, organizing troops, securing the city beyond the arena. The galaxy was shifting faster than anyone could follow. Star systems that had bent the knee to the warlords for generations were rising in open revolt now that the Empire's power had cracked on live broadcast. And through it all, Jim just stood there in his sneakers and torn tracksuit, looking like someone who had shown up to mow a lawn and accidentally won a revolution. Reporters from a dozen species swarmed him before the smoke had even cleared, shoving cameras and microphones into his face. They shouted questions in overlapping languages while translators scrambled to keep up. How had he beaten Kravax? Was the rebellion planned? Did Earth intend to seize power now that the Empire had fallen? Jim held up his hands and shook his head. "No, no, no," he said. "Earth doesn't want anything to do with this. We don't even recycle properly. Trust me, you don't want us in charge." The crowd laughed at that, the tension breaking for a moment as people realized this strange human wasn't about to crown himself emperor. Some of the rebel leaders looked disappointed, others relieved. Power vacuums made people nervous. But Jim had no interest in thrones or titles or armies. He just wanted to get back to his small house in Ohio where the most dangerous thing in his life had been the neighbor's cat that kept attacking his garden gnomes. Kevin leaned heavily against him as medics hurried over to treat the creature's wounds. The beast had saved his life more than once, and Jim wasn't about to leave without making sure it got the care it needed. While the medics worked, Erath approached again, this time carrying something wrapped in dark cloth. He held it out to Jim with a solemn expression. "The people wish to give you this," he said. "It is the highest honor of the liberated worlds." Jim unwrapped it slowly, revealing a simple metal carved from the crystal heart of the arena itself, still glowing faintly from the energy that had once powered the games. He stared at it for a long moment, then slipped it into his pocket. "Thanks," he said. "But I really mean it. I'm going home." Within hours, ships filled the sky above the city, some fleeing, some carrying rebel troops to other worlds as the Empire collapsed in waves. Broadcasts showed warlord palaces burning on distant planets, prisons opening, fleets turning against their masters. The galaxy was breaking free one system at a time, all because Earth's wildest warrior had refused to play by the rules of their games. Jim watched it all from the edge of the arena, feeling like someone standing in the middle of a parade they hadn't meant to start. When a transport ship finally came to take him back to Earth, Erath stood at the ramp waiting. "I will not stay here," the alien commander said. "I have spent my life serving warlords who fell in a single day. Perhaps it is time to see a world without thrones and empires." Jim shrugged. "Sure. Just watch out for the HOA fees. They're brutal." The ship lifted off as the crowds below cheered, their voices echoing across the city as fireworks from liberated districts lit the sky. Kevin lay curled in the cargo hold, already snoring like a freight train. Erath stood at the window watching the stars slide past, silent as always. And Jim sat in a chair with his head tilted back, wondering how he was going to explain any of this to his neighbors when he got home. Weeks later, Earth erupted in celebration when the news finally arrived. The galaxy called him a hero, a liberator, a legend. Statues of him appeared on planets he had never even heard of. But Jim just went back to teaching gym class at the local school, whistling at kids to stop climbing the bleachers and making sure nobody lost an eye during dodgeball. He kept the medal in a drawer next to his socks. Kevin became a global celebrity, showing up at baseball games and charity events while refusing to eat anything but granola bars. Erath moved into a small apartment down the street and started working at the library, claiming he wanted a quiet life after a career of conquest. Sometimes reporters came to ask Jim for interviews, but he always said the same thing. He hadn't come to overthrow an empire. He hadn't come to fight or lead or change history. He had just shown up, done what he could, and somehow everything had fallen apart around him. If people wanted to call that heroism, fine. But as far as Jim Henderson was concerned, he was just a guy who got really, really lucky in sneakers that still squeaked when he walked across the gym floor.